During dinner, my son-in-law, drunk on whiskey, threw a glass at my face because I refused to pour him another drink. "Servants must obey," he shouted, as if I were not his father, but a servant in my own home. And the next morning, when he woke up, he saw something that made him scream in horror. My revenge, cold and inevitable. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The whiskey bottle was nearly empty when Leroy started talking about servants. I'd been watching him pour since he came home 30 minutes earlier, each glass fuller than the last. His tie hung loose around his neck, jacket thrown over the back of his chair. The dining room felt smaller with his frustration filling it. "My boss wouldn't know a good deal if it smacked him right in the mouth," he said, words beginning to blur at the edges. He snapped his fingers, the sound sharp in the quiet room. 3 months of work gone, just like that. Georgiana reached across the table, her hand finding his forearm. "Maybe he'll reconsider tomorrow, honey. You know how Mr. Hendricks can be." I sat at the head of my own table, the oak solid beneath my palms. I'd finished eating 20 minutes ago. The evening light was fading through the windows, painting the room in shades of amber and shadow. 8 months they'd been living here. 8 months since Georgiana had called, voice tight with embarrassment, asking if they could stay, just temporarily, while Leroy changed positions. Temporary had stretched like taffy. "Must be comfortable," Leroy said, turning his attention toward me. His eyes had that unfocused quality I'd learned to recognize. "Sitting here all day. No pressure, no deadlines, no boss breathing down your neck." "Dad just finished that legal thriller you recommended?" Georgiana cut in, brightness forced into her tone. "The one about the judge? Didn't you want to discuss it?" I kept my hands folded on the table. "I think your husband has something on his mind." Leroy leaned back, and his chair creaked. "Living like royalty while the rest of us actually work. That's what I've got on my mind." The words settled between us like stones dropping into still water. Georgiana's hand tightened on his arm, knuckles going pale. "I worked for 3 decades putting criminals behind bars," I said. My voice came out measured, each word placed with intention. "This house? I earned it. Every room, every piece of furniture. Don't confuse my retirement with your resentment." The family photos on the walls watched us. Georgiana's wedding day, her mother and me flanking her in front of the church. Better times when smiles came easier. Leroy poured himself another drink, the whiskey sloshing against glass. His movements had grown loose, aggressive. He drank half of it in one swallow. "Leroy, please," Georgiana whispered. She stood, began gathering plates with trembling hands. The china rattled as she stacked it. "Let me clear these. We can watch that movie you wanted to see." But Leroy wasn't finished. He leaned forward, elbows on my table, glass dangling from his fingers. "You know what I think? I think you've forgotten what real work feels like." I remained seated. Stillness, I'd learned in 30 years of courtrooms, could be more powerful than volume. I held his gaze, let the silence stretch. "People break their backs out there," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward the window. "Real people, working people, not sitting around reading books and taking afternoon naps." "That's enough," I said quietly. Georgiana positioned herself between us, one hand on the table edge, the other still touching her husband's shoulder. She was trying to be a bridge, but bridges can only take so much weight before they crack. "Dad's earned his rest," she said. "You know he has. And he's been so generous letting us—" "Generous?" Leroy's laugh came out sharp and bitter. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the hardwood with a sound like tearing fabric. The glass swayed in his hand as he pointed it toward me. "Is it generosity when you remind us every single day whose house this is?" "I've never said a word about it," I replied. "You don't have to say it. It's in every look, every time you sit there watching us like we're performing for you." The whiskey bottle remained on the sideboard, 1 meter behind Leroy's chair, close enough to reach without effort. I'd put it there myself before dinner, making sure it was accessible. Now it sat untouched, while my son-in-law held out his empty glass. "Get me more whiskey, old man." His voice had shifted into something commanding, entitled, "The bottle's way over there, and I'm comfortable right here." Georgiana's breath caught. "Leroy, you can reach it yourself. It's right behind you." I asked him to do it. Leroy's eyes stayed locked on mine. "Or is serving beneath you, too?" I stood slowly, deliberately. My chair didn't scrape. I didn't rush. When I reached my full height, I squared my shoulders and met his glassy stare with the same expression I'd used on defendants who thought intimidation was a strategy. "There are no servants in this house," I said. Each word came out level, final. "And there's only one person here who decides who does what. That's me. Hey, you're a guest, Leroy. You might want to remember that." The air in the room changed. Georgiana froze, her hand still extended toward her husband's arm, but no longer touching him. The chandelier hummed its electric song overhead. Through the archway, I could see the front door, solid and closed. Leroy's face flushed darker. His fingers tightened around the glass until I thought it might shatter in his grip. He swayed slightly, whether from alcohol or rage I couldn't tell. "A guest," he repeated, voice dropping to something dangerous and low. I gestured calmly toward the sideboard, one finger pointing to the bottle he could easily reach himself. "You know where it is." Something shifted in his expression then, something I recognized from my years watching criminals, realized they'd been backed into corners, desperation mixed with fury, logic drowning in emotion. Georgiana stepped forward, hands raised between us like she could physically hold back whatever was building. "Please, both of you, let's just—" But I could see it in Leroy's eyes. The room had changed. The evening had changed. And in that moment, staring at my son-in-law across my own dining table, I understood that 8 months of patience had bought me nothing but this, a drunk man's contempt in my own home. Leroy took 2 steps toward me, closing the distance until I could smell the whiskey on his breath. The glass hung at his chest level, ice rattling against crystal. His height advantage meant nothing to me. I'd faced down men far more dangerous in courtrooms, men with nothing left to lose. This was just a frustrated sales manager who'd had too much to drink. I held my ground, feet planted, shoulders back, hands loose at my sides, not retreating, not advancing, simply immovable. "Pour my drink." Each word came out separate, deliberate, slurred at the edges. "Old man, servants obey their masters. That's how this works." The temperature in the room seemed to rise. Outside, full darkness had settled over Scottsdale. The chandelier cast harsh shadows across Leroy's flushed face. "There are no masters in this house except me." My voice came out cold, the tone I'd used for closing arguments. "You're a guest. Remember that." Georgiana moved between us, her voice climbing toward panic. "Stop. Both of you, please. Leroy, honey, you've had enough. Dad, please." But Leroy wasn't listening to his wife. His arm snapped forward before I could process the motion. The glass left his hand, tumbling through the space between us. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. I saw the crystal catching light, saw the amber liquid trailing behind it like a comet's tail, saw ice cubes separating in mid-flight, then impact. The glass struck my temple and cheekbone with enough force to split skin. Pain exploded bright and sharp across the right side of my face. The crystal shattered, fragments bouncing off my shoulder and chest. Whiskey sprayed across my neck, cold and stinging where it met the cut. Ice hit the floor, scattering across hardwood. I staggered back a step, hand rising automatically to my temple. When I pulled my fingers away, they came back red. "Oh my—" Georgiana's gasp cut through the ringing in my ears. She whirled toward her husband, hands coming up to push against his chest. "Leroy, what did you—" He stood there, arms still extended, eyes wide like he'd surprised himself. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Get him out." My voice sounded distant, muffled. Warm blood traced a line down the side of my face, tickling my jaw. "Get him out of my sight." Georgiana was crying now, tears streaming as she pushed Leroy backward toward the stairs. He stumbled, his coordination betraying him, and she used his momentum to guide him away from me. "I'm sorry, Dad." Her voice broke on the words. She kept one hand on Leroy's chest, the other reaching back toward me in a useless gesture. "I'm so sorry. He didn't mean it. Please, let me get him upstairs. I'm sorry." "Georgiana," I started, but she was already moving, both hands on her husband now, steering him toward the staircase. "Just let me handle this," she said, not looking at me. "Please, just give me a minute." They disappeared up the stairs, Leroy's footsteps heavy and uneven, Georgiana's voice a desperate murmur I couldn't make out. A door closed above me, then silence. I stood alone in the dining room, hand pressed to my bleeding temple. The dinner plates still sat on the table, abandoned mid-clearing. The whiskey bottle remained on the sideboard, witness to everything. Shattered glass glittered on the floor near my feet, catching the chandelier's light like scattered diamonds. My legs felt unsteady, not from the blow, I'd taken worse in my time, but from the violation of it, in my own home, at my own table. After 8 months of patience, of biting my tongue, of making space for them in my life. This is what kindness bought me. I walked down the hall toward the bathroom, my footsteps the only sound in the house. Blood dripped onto my collar, a dark stain spreading across white fabric. The bathroom light buzzed when I flicked the switch, fluorescent and harsh. The mirror showed me everything. The cut ran along my temple, about 2 inches long, deep enough to bleed freely but not require stitches. Already, a bruise was forming around it, purple spreading beneath skin like watercolor on wet paper. My cheekbone had caught the brunt of the impact. Swelling had already begun, distorting the right side of my face, but it was my eyes that caught my attention. They looked different than they had an hour ago, harder, colder, the eyes of a prosecutor who'd just been handed all the evidence he needed. I touched the cut gently, felt the edges where glass had split flesh. Pain flared bright and immediate, but I welcomed it. Pain meant clarity. Pain meant I wouldn't forget this moment when morning came and second thoughts tried to creep in. 8 months I gave them. 8 months of opening my home, sharing my space, tolerating Leroy's barely concealed resentment, and Georgiana's careful navigation between us. I'd told myself it was temporary. I told myself family came first. I told myself that patience was strength. But they hadn't seen patience. They'd seen weakness. Leroy had looked at my generosity and mistaken it for surrender. He'd looked at my silence and heard permission. He'd looked at my age and seen someone to dominate, to dismiss, to command like hired help. He'd forgotten something crucial. I'd spent 30 years learning how the law worked, how evidence collected, how cases built, how justice found its way to those who thought they were untouchable. In the mirror, my reflection stared back with blood trailing down the temple and something new hardening in the eyes. Not rage. Rage was impulsive, sloppy, the tool of men like Leroy. This was something colder, more deliberate. This was determination. I turned on the faucet, let cold water run over my hands, bent down, splashed my face carefully around the injury. The water turned pink in the basin, swirling down the drain. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights briefly illuminating the bathroom window. Upstairs, I heard nothing. Georgiana had chosen her husband, pulled him away before I could call the police. She'd apologized to me while protecting the man who'd just committed assault. In that moment of crisis, she'd made her choice clear. Fine. Let her sleep beside him tonight. Let her lie awake wondering what comes next. Let her try to convince herself that whiskey and work, stress excused violence. Let her remember the look on her father's face when her husband's glass connected with his temple. I dried my hands on the towel, studied my reflection one more time. The prosecutor in me was already cataloging unprovoked assault, physical evidence, witness present, clear escalation pattern. Leroy had thought he was establishing dominance. What he'd actually done was hand me a weapon. Sleep wouldn't come tonight. I had planning to do. Phone calls to make when morning arrived. Documentation to gather. Decisions to finalize. Leroy had made his choice when he threw that glass. Now I would make mine. And in the end, he'd learn what every criminal eventually discovers, that patience isn't weakness, and silence isn't consent. And some men spend their entire lives learning how justice works, then wield it like a scalpel when necessary. This was a mistake he would never forget. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The throb in my temple kept rhythm with my thoughts, each pulse a reminder of what had happened at my own table. Around 3 a.m, I sat in my office chair and watched the hours crawl past. The house made its usual settling sounds, creaks and whispers I'd learned over 30 years of ownership. Upstairs, silence. Georgiana and Leroy behind their closed door, sleeping or pretending to sleep. I wondered if she lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile what her husband had done. When dawn finally broke around 6, light creeping through the blinds in shades of pink and gold, I stood and walked to the bathroom. The mirror showed me what I needed. Evidence. The bruising had spread overnight. Purple dominated my right temple, bleeding into yellow at the edges. The cut from the glass ran 2 inches along my hairline, scabbed over but clearly visible. My cheekbone had swollen, distorting the symmetry of my face. I pulled out my phone and began documenting. Profile shot, the bruise catching morning light. Front view, showing the full extent of facial damage. Close-up of the cut, making sure the depth was clear. Each photo date stamped, March 13th at 6:15 a.m. I'd testified in enough trials to know what prosecutors needed. By 6:30, I stood in the kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear. Scottsdale Police, how may I direct your call? I'm reporting an assault that occurred in my home last night. My voice came out steady, factual. The perpetrator is still on the premises. I have visible injuries, and I'm ready to provide a full statement. They arrived within 30 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both professional and thorough. I led them through my house like a prosecutor, presenting evidence to a jury. It happened here, I said, gesturing to the dining room. The chair Leroy had shoved back remained at an angle. Glass fragments still glittered on the hardwood where I'd deliberately left them untouched. My shirt from last night draped over a chair back, the collar stained dark with dried blood and whiskey. The female officer photographed everything while her partner took my statement. Mr. Wood, can you describe what happened? Take your time. Start from the beginning of the incident. I walked them through it. Dinner, Leroy's drinking, the escalating hostility, his demand that I serve him, my refusal, the glass leaving his hand and striking my face, Georgiana pulling him away, all of it delivered in the measured tone I'd perfected over 3 decades in courtrooms. And where is Mr. Patterson now? Upstairs in the guest bedroom, second door on the right. They climbed the stairs together, footsteps heavy on carpet. I remained in the living room, settled into my armchair, hands folded in my lap, waiting. The knock on the bedroom door echoed through the quiet morning, voices muffled, then Leroy's, louder, confused. What is this? I heard the bedroom door open fully, more conversation I couldn't quite make out. Then Leroy appeared at the top of the stairs in boxer shorts and an undershirt, squinting against the hallway light. The officers flanked him, professional and unmoved by his protests. Wilbert, what did you do? His voice climbed toward anger. This is ridiculous. It was an accident. You're seriously calling the cops on family? I met his eyes but said nothing. Let him see the bruise. Let him see the officers. Let him understand that this was happening. Sir, we need you to get dressed, the male officer said. You're being placed under arrest for assault. Georgiana rushed into the hallway, her face pale with shock. Wait, please, can we just talk about this? But there was nothing to discuss. The female officer read Leroy his rights, while her partner waited for him to pull on jeans and a shirt. The words washed over us all like a familiar prayer. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The handcuffs clicked around Leroy's wrists. That sound, metal on metal, final and irreversible, seemed to fill the entire house. Georgiana followed them down the stairs, crying now. She grabbed my arm as I stood. Dad, please, call them back. Tell them it was a mistake. He's my husband. Think about what this will do to us. Please. I looked at her tear-streaked face and felt something in my chest tighten, but I'd spent too many years teaching her right from wrong to abandon those lessons now. I taught you there's a law that applies to everyone, I said quietly. He broke it in my house. What would you have me teach you now? That violence has no consequences? But he's family? The law doesn't stop because we're family. She released my arm, stepped back as if I'd struck her. The officers led Leroy past us, through the front door and into the bright morning sun. Georgiana followed them onto the porch, still pleading. I watched through the living room window. Leroy, handcuffed, being guided into the patrol car's back seat. The officer's hand on his head, pushing him down the way they always do. The door closing. Georgiana standing in my driveway in her bathrobe, watching her husband disappear behind tinted glass. The patrol car pulled away. Its lights weren't flashing. No emergency, just routine transport of someone who'd committed a crime. I stepped back from the window and let the curtain fall closed. The house felt different already, quieter, as if something that had been pressing against the walls had suddenly released. Georgiana came back inside, moved past me without speaking, and climbed the stairs to her room. Her door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam would have. I returned to the dining room and began picking up the glass fragments, dropping them into a plastic bag the officers had left for additional evidence. Each piece caught the morning light as it fell, tinkling against the others. My phone sat on the table where I'd left it. I picked it up, scrolled through my contacts, and found the number I needed. The courthouse opened at 8. I'd file for a protective order before lunch. This was only the beginning. 26 hours after his arrest, Leroy walked out of the Scottsdale jail into morning sunlight that made him squint and shield his eyes. I wasn't there to see it, but Georgiana told me later, her voice mechanical and exhausted. She'd driven to pick him up, parked in the visitor lot, and watched him emerge through the heavy glass doors wearing the same clothes he'd been arrested in, rumpled and defeated. While they drove away from that building, I sat in a courthouse hallway 3 miles distant, waiting for my name to be called. The protective order hearing lasted 15 minutes. I showed the judge my photographs, my medical documentation, and the police report. The judge, a woman in her 50s who'd seen 1,000 cases like mine, barely hesitated before signing the temporary order. 100 yards minimum distance from the petitioner and his residence, she said, pen scratching across paper. Valid immediately, enforceable by law. Full hearing in 3 weeks. I thanked her and left with the stamped documents in my hand. Official, legal, irreversible. What I didn't know until later was that a court clerk had been dispatched to serve Leroy the moment he left jail. Standard procedure for emergency protective orders. They find you fast. Georgiana's car was still in the parking lot, Leroy in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone with shaking hands, when the clerk approached the window with a clipboard. "Leroy Patterson?" He looked up, confused. "That's me. I need to serve you with a protective order." The papers went through the window. Leroy unfolded them, read the header, then the restrictions listed in bold type. His face went white, Georgiana said. Actually lost color like someone had opened a drain. "You're required to maintain a distance of 100 yards from Wilbert Wood and his residence. Do you understand?" "This is my house." His voice broke on the words. "My home. He can't kick me out of my own home." But it wasn't his home. It was mine. It had always been mine. And now the law agreed. They spent that afternoon hunting for apartments. Georgiana drove while Leroy scrolled listings on her phone, his rage gradually giving way to something worse, panic. The cheapest places they found were $1,400 a month for studios, in neighborhoods they'd never have considered before. They settled on a unit in a complex off Indian School Road, ground floor with thin walls and a parking lot that smelled like hot asphalt. The leasing agent, a tired woman with processed hair, sensed their desperation immediately. "Employment verification will take 3 days," she said, looking at Leroy's application. "I'm employed," he said quickly. "Sales position. Your credit score is showing some issues." Georgiana spoke up then. "I'll co-sign. I have good credit." The woman's eyes flicked between them, assessing. "Both of you will be liable for the full amount, if there are any problems." "We understand." They signed the lease that afternoon. I know because Georgiana texted me that evening asking when they could collect his belongings. I responded with business-like efficiency. "Thursday between 2 and 4 p.m. I will not be present. Take only what belongs to him. The house locks change. Friday." Thursday came. I left my house at 1:45 p.m., drove to a Starbucks 3 miles away, and sat with my laptop and coffee while strangers occupied my home. It took enormous control not to return early, to check if they were taking anything beyond what was theirs. But the protective order required 100 yards minimum distance, and I wouldn't violate my own legal protection. At 4:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Georgiana. One word: gone. I drove home slowly, taking surface streets instead of the highway. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly the same from outside. But inside, I could feel the absence immediately. The guest bedroom closet stood open and empty, dresser drawers pulled out, abandoned in haste. The bathroom they'd used had been cleared of toiletries, leaving rings on the counter where bottles had stood. I walked through each room methodically, checking, cataloging. Small things had disappeared. A coffee mug I'd liked, a phone charger that wasn't Leroy's, but he'd taken anyway. Nothing worth fighting over. Nothing worth mentioning. In the guest bedroom, I stripped the sheets myself, pulled the comforter off, opened the windows to let in fresh air. The mattress looked bare and impersonal, just furniture again instead of their space. The house was mine once more. Completely, totally mine. But I wasn't finished. That evening I sat at my desk and searched online for private investigators in Scottsdale. Found 3 with good reviews. Called the one whose website emphasized financial investigations and employment verification. Made an appointment for the next morning. His office occupied a bland suite in a building off Scottsdale Road, the kind of place where businesses came and went without leaving impressions. The investigator, Robert Chen, 40-something with silver-rimmed glasses, shook my hand and gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Mr. Wood, what can I do for you?" I slid the police report across his desk. "The man who did this is my son-in-law. I want to know everything about his financial situation. Debts, assets, employment status, vulnerabilities." Chen read through the report, expression never changing. When he looked up, his eyes held a glint of understanding. "This is personal." "It's justice." He smiled slightly. "How deep do you want me to dig?" I held his gaze, thinking about Leroy and his cheap apartment, thinking he'd escaped with nothing but embarrassment and a court date, thinking the worst was behind him. All the way down. 3 weeks after I hired Robert Chen, a thick email arrived in my inbox with the subject line, "Investigation complete. L. Patterson." I sat at my kitchen table with morning coffee, opened the attachment, and began printing. 47 pages emerged from my printer, still warm to the touch. I spread them across the table like cards in a complex game of solitaire. The first section covered finances. 7 credit cards, all maxed. Total debt, $43,000. Interest rates ranging from 19 to 28%. Minimum payments alone totaled $1,200 monthly, nearly what he paid in rent. My coffee grew cold as I read deeper. Employment records showed his sales commissions had dropped 60% over the past year. Lost clients, missed quotas, performance reviews deteriorating from meets expectations to needs improvement to probationary status. His boss had written in March, "Leroy seems distracted and hostile. Customer complaints increasing." I turned to page 23 and stopped breathing. Bank statements from Georgiana's retirement account. 3 withdrawals over 3 months. $7,000 in January, $5,000 in February, $3,000 in March, $15,000 total, taken while they lived under my roof, rent-free, eating meals I'd paid for. I traced my finger down the dates. January, when he'd complained about holiday expenses. February, right after his worst sales month. March, 2 weeks before he threw the glass. He'd been draining her future while smiling at my dinner table. But the final section made everything else pale by comparison. Chen had interviewed 3 of Leroy's co-workers. Their statements, typed and notarized, contained direct quotes. I read them twice to make certain I understood. Leroy said the old man wouldn't last much longer. Said he was inheriting an $850,000 house soon. Talked about it like it was guaranteed. Another co-worker. He called it an investment strategy. Move in, wait it out, inherit. Those were his actual words. The third statement was shortest but sharpest. Leroy joked that retirement homes were expensive. Said his father-in-law wouldn't waste money on one when he had free care at home. We all knew he meant himself and his wife. I set the papers down carefully as if they might combust. He hadn't moved into my home because Georgiana asked. He'd moved in because he saw me as an asset to acquire. Not a father-in-law, not family. A real estate investment with an expiration date. The phone rang. Chen's number. "Mr. Wood, I've sent everything I found. The financial picture is worse than typical. Credit cards maxed, declining income, and he's been accessing your daughter's retirement funds without proper disclosure. The witness statements speak for themselves." "They do indeed," I said quietly. "Is there anything else you need?" "No. This is comprehensive. Thank you." I hung up and sat alone with the evidence scattered before me. Morning sun slanted through the kitchen windows, illuminating columns of numbers that told a story of systematic failure, financial incompetence, theft, mercenary calculation disguised as family loyalty. By noon, I'd called the notary service recommended by my bar association and scheduled an appointment for the following morning. By 2 o'clock, I'd drafted a new will, drawing on 30 years of legal experience to construct something elegant and binding. The next morning, I sat across a desk from a notary named Patricia Reeves, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain. She reviewed my handwritten draft carefully. "Mr. Wood, this conditional clause is unusual. Your daughter inherits only if divorced. You understand this might cause family conflict?" "I understand completely. That's the point. She chooses him. She chooses poverty. She chooses herself. She has security. Her decision." Patricia studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "You're well within your rights. Let me type this properly for signature." It took 90 minutes to formalize everything. The conditional inheritance. Georgiana received the house, retirement accounts, and remaining assets only if legally divorced from Leroy Patterson before my death. Otherwise, the entire estate went to the Arizona Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Patricia witnessed my signature, sealed the document with her notary stamp, and placed it in a fireproof envelope. "This is now legally binding. Would you like copies?" "3, please, and I need one more service." I handed her a typed letter addressed to Georgiana. Brief, formal, revealing nothing specific. "Estate planning documents have been updated. Conditional terms now apply to inheritance. Consult your attorney for implications." "Send this certified mail. She'll need to sign for it." Patricia sealed the letter, affixed postage, and handed it back to me. "You can drop this at any post office." I drove to the corner near my house where the blue mailbox stood in afternoon shade, held the envelope for a moment, feeling its weight. Inside was a seed of doubt, a question Georgiana couldn't ignore. What had her father done, and why? She'd received this in 3 days, 2 days before Leroy's court hearing. The timing was deliberate. I wanted her questioning everything when Leroy stood before a judge. Wanted her wondering about her financial future while her husband accepted consequences for his violence. Wanted the doubt growing like a crack in foundation, silent but structural. I dropped the letter through the slot. The metal door clanged shut with finality. Walking back home, I watched the sun arc toward evening, shadows lengthening across sidewalks I'd walked for 30 years. My house waited ahead, solid and permanent, the asset Leroy had counted on inheriting. He'd wanted it so badly he could taste it, talked about it at work like it was already his, moved in and watched the calendar, waiting for nature to deliver his prize. Now he was guaranteed that Georgiana would get nothing unless she left him. He'd stolen from her retirement, planning to make it up with my estate. But the estate had conditions now: divorce him and inherit security. Stay with him and inherit nothing. Fair trade, I thought. He wanted to inherit my house. Now he's guaranteed she'll never see a penny of it while they're married. Let's see how he explains stealing from her retirement when that certified letter arrives. The Maricopa County Superior Court building rose 12 stories in downtown Phoenix, glass and concrete reflecting morning sun. I arrived at 9, dressed in my courtroom suit, navy blue, pressed sharp, showing respect for the proceedings I'd initiated. The gallery held maybe 20 people scattered across wooden benches. I chose 3rd row, center, perfect sightline to the defense table where Leroy would sit, perfect angle to watch him squirm. At 9:15, the courtroom door opened and Leroy entered with his public defender and Georgiana. He wore a suit that didn't fit, shoulders too wide, sleeves too long, borrowed from someone larger. His tie sat crooked against his collar. He saw me immediately. Our eyes met across the formal space. His face flushed dark, jaw clenching. Georgiana touched his arm, whispered something, guided him to the defense table. He sat, but kept glancing backward, unable to help himself. I remained motionless, silent, just existing. The prosecutor arrived, a young woman with a leather briefcase who conferred briefly with the public defender. Papers exchanged hands. The plea agreement already negotiated, ready for judicial approval. "All rise!" The judge entered, a man in his 50s, graying at the temples, face neutral and efficient. Everyone stood. Leroy's movement was sluggish, reluctant, like standing physically pained him. I stood smoothly, old courtroom habits, automatic. We sat. The judge reviewed his docket. The State of Arizona versus Leroy Patterson. Case number CR 2025-04702. Counsel, my understanding is we have a negotiated plea? The prosecutor stood. Yes, Your Honor. The state offers the following. Defendant pleads guilty to simple assault. Receives 18 months supervised probation. Fine of $2,500 payable within 60 days. Completion of certified anger management program consisting of 26 weekly sessions and 50 hours community service to be completed within 6 months. The judge turned to Leroy. Mr. Patterson, do you understand the charges against you? Yes. The word came out flat, mechanical. Are you entering this plea voluntarily without coercion? Yes. Do you understand that by accepting this plea, you're admitting you committed assault against your father-in-law in his own home? Leroy hesitated. His public defender leaned over, whispered urgently. Finally, yes. Do you understand the terms of probation, including that any violation results in jail time? I understand. The public defender slid papers across the table. Leroy stared at them. The plea agreement, typed formally, requiring signature. He picked up the pen. Pressed down so hard the tip tore paper slightly at the corner, scrawled his name. The judge accepted the signed document. The court accepts your guilty plea and sentences you accordingly. Probation begins today. You'll be assigned an officer who will explain all requirements. Community service must be documented and verified. Anger management program must be state certified. Do you have any questions? Leroy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Your Honor, I just want to say... His lawyer's hand shot out, gripping his forearm. But Leroy shook it off. This whole thing is ridiculous. It was an accident. I never meant... He's sitting right there, watching like this is entertainment. He destroyed my life over nothing. Over an argument. He's vindictive, and... Mr. Patterson, the judge's voice cut through like a blade. The time for statements has passed. You've pled guilty. The case is concluded. But we're done here. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Final. Binding. Leroy stood, still trembling with suppressed rage. Georgiana rose beside him, touched his back, tried to guide him toward the exit. They walked down the center aisle, Leroy's footsteps heavy on tile. As they reached my row, he stopped, turned, pointed directly at me. You'll regret this, old man. This is your fault. You ruined everything. His voice echoed off courtroom walls, loud enough to make everyone turn and stare. Security officers moved immediately, hands going to their belts, converging on him. The judge's gavel slammed down twice, hard. Mr. Patterson, approach the bench. Now. The courtroom froze. Georgiana's hand flew to her mouth. The public defender's face went pale. Leroy stood there, finger still extended toward me, realization dawning slowly that he'd made a terrible mistake. Mr. Patterson, I said approach. Leroy walked back to the defense table on legs that had suddenly lost coordination. His lawyer stood beside him, shoulders slumped in defeat. The judge leaned forward, voice ice-cold and precise. You just threatened the victim in open court, in front of witnesses, including 2 court security officers and a prosecutor. Your probation terms now include mandatory weekly in-person check-ins with your probation officer. Any further violation, and I mean anything, including raised voices or indirect contact, results in immediate incarceration. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. I'm noting your outburst in the official record. Your probation officer will be informed. You're dismissed. And Mr. Patterson, I suggest you learn to control yourself. Leroy turned and walked out, this time silent, head down. Georgiana followed several steps behind, creating distance between them, not touching him. I remained seated while they left, waited until the courtroom door closed behind them. Then I stood, gathered my jacket, and walked toward the exit. In the hallway, I caught Georgiana's eye for just a moment. She stood by the elevators while Leroy paced near the windows, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling someone to complain about the injustice of it all. Her expression held something I hadn't seen before: confusion, doubt. Maybe the first hint of understanding that the man she'd married wasn't who she'd believed him to be. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. The doors closed. I took the stairs instead, descending 12 flights slowly, giving them time to leave the building before I reached ground level. Outside, Phoenix heat hit like a wall. I walked to my car, started the engine, let the air conditioning run while I sat in the parking garage. Leroy had probation for 18 months, weekly check-ins, anger management sessions he'd have to pay for, community service hours, fines due within 60 days, and enhanced supervision because he couldn't keep his mouth shut, even when it was clearly in his own interest. The probation terms gave him dozens of ways to fail, dozens of appointments to miss, payments to skip, requirements to ignore. All I had to do was wait and let his character do the work for me. He couldn't help himself. Give him rope and he'd hang himself. Every single time. 6 weeks after the courthouse, my phone rang while I sat at an outdoor coffee shop on Scottsdale Road, enjoying an iced cappuccino and the midday sun. Georgiana's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice more before answering, taking a slow sip of coffee first. "Dad, it's me." Her voice carried a tremor I recognized from when she was young, and had done something she regretted but couldn't undo. "Hello, Georgiana. Things are really hard right now. Leroy lost his job. Background check came back with a conviction. They let him go. We're trying to make it work, but—" She paused, gathering courage. "I was hoping maybe you could help us. Just temporarily. Until he finds something new." I set my cup down carefully on the small metal table. Around me, other patrons talked quietly. Traffic hummed past on the street, normal life continuing while my daughter called to ask for money she desperately needed. "I will help you," I said. Each word came out measured, clear. "One condition, file for divorce and move back home. That's what I'm offering. Not money, not loans. A home for my daughter. Alone." Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow. "You want me to leave my husband when he's struggling? What kind of father makes that demand?" Her voice climbed toward anger. "I can't believe you'd—" Then she stopped. I heard the moment realization hit, could almost see her face changing as understanding dawned. "You planned this, didn't you? You knew he'd lose his job. You knew we'd be desperate. This whole thing—" I pressed charges after he assaulted me in my own home. Everything that followed came from his choices, not mine. But you won't help us. I'll help you, not him. There's a difference." She hung up without saying anything else. The call ended with a soft click that felt louder than shouting would have. I picked up my cappuccino and finished it slowly, watching cars pass and people walk by with shopping bags and purpose. The Arizona summer heat pressed down from a cloudless sky, but in the shade of the coffee shop awning, the temperature stayed tolerable. My phone remained silent on the table. No callback, no text, just silence. That was fine. I'd said what needed saying. The offer stood whether she accepted it today or in 6 months. The timeline was hers to control. What I didn't know until later was what had happened that morning at Leroy's office. He'd been called to HR at 10 o'clock. Routine meeting, they'd said. He'd walked in expecting some policy update or benefits enrollment reminder. Instead, the HR manager, a woman named Patricia with gray-streaked hair and professional sympathy, slid a folder across her desk. "Leroy, our annual compliance review flagged your record. Company policy is clear. Employees with assault convictions cannot maintain client-facing positions. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance." He'd stared at the paperwork, reading the same sentences multiple times without processing them. Background check, criminal record, assault conviction, policy violation, termination. I can transfer to a different role, internal operations, something without client contact. There are no open positions that fit those parameters. I'm sorry. She wasn't sorry, not really. She was executing corporate policy, protecting the company from liability. He could see it in the way she kept her hands folded on the desk, her expression neutral and final. He signed the termination papers because refusing wouldn't change anything. Walked to his desk, loaded personal items into a cardboard box, framed sales awards from better years, a coffee mug Georgiana had given him, pens and notepads that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's career. The parking lot stretched hot and empty under noon sun. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, before starting the engine. That evening, in their apartment that smelled like old carpet and the neighbors cooking, he told Georgiana what had happened. Your father did this. His criminal charges destroyed my career. Background checks will kill every application now. Everything we're going through, the money, the stress, all of it, is his fault. She'd tried to budget on paper, writing numbers in neat columns. Rent $1,400. Probation fees $40 weekly. Anger management $75 weekly. Utilities, groceries, insurance. Her income covered maybe half their expenses. The gap yawned wider every day. 2 days later, she'd swallowed her pride and called me. Made her veiled request for help. Received my conditional offer in return. Now she stood in their apartment kitchen, phone in hand, staring at bills spread across the counter like accusations. Leroy emerged from the bedroom. What did he say? She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing him differently than she had 6 weeks ago. Seeing him through her father's eyes, maybe. He said no, he won't help. It was easier than explaining the truth. Easier than saying her father would help her, specifically her, if she made one choice she wasn't ready to make. I told you. Leroy's voice carried bitter satisfaction. He wants us to suffer. This proves it. Your own father, refusing to help his daughter when she needs him. That's who he really is. Georgiana nodded automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying her father's words, the specific phrasing he'd used. I'll help you. Only you. File for divorce and come home. Not them. Not us. You. She looked down at the bills again, at numbers that didn't add up no matter how she arranged them, at the apartment lease with her name as co-signer, at the marriage that had cost her home, security, and her father's trust. File for divorce. Come home. That's what he said. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the bills into a pile, straightening edges that didn't need straightening. But I can't. Can I? 6 weeks passed without contact. July heat settled over Phoenix like a weight, temperatures climbing past 110 most afternoons. I stayed in my house, air conditioning humming reliably, reading on the back patio during early mornings when the temperature was merely brutal instead of unbearable. I didn't call Georgiana, didn't text. The silence between us felt deliberate on both sides, each of us waiting for something neither could name. What I didn't see was how their apartment had become a pressure cooker. Leroy, unemployed and unemployable, sent applications into voids that never responded. When interviews came, 3 and 6 weeks, they ended the same way. Background check, conviction, thank you for your interest. Georgiana worked remotely, 50-hour weeks trying to cover expenses that kept multiplying. Rent went unpaid. First 1 week, then 2. The landlord left a notice on their door, formal and final. Pay within 5 days or face eviction. Late one afternoon, Georgiana sat at the small desk in their apartment's corner, laptop open to work email she wasn't reading. She needed tax documents, something about an amendment her accountant required. The filing cabinet stood against the wall, metal and beige, filled with papers Leroy had organized when they moved in. She pulled open the bottom drawer, searching for last year's W-2s. Instead, she found a manila folder labeled Fidelity, Retirement. Her hand hesitated before pulling it out. These were her accounts. She had online access. She didn't need paper statements anymore, but the folder felt thick, too thick for statements she'd already seen digitally. She opened it. The first statement showed a balance of $28,000, dated December. That matched what she remembered. The second statement, dated January, showed a withdrawal. $7,000. Balance, $21,000. Her fingers went cold. February statement, another withdrawal. $5,000. Balance, $16,000. March statement, $3,000 gone. Balance, $13,000. $15,000. Taken across 3 months. Transactions she'd never authorized. Money disappearing from her retirement while they lived rent-free in her father's house. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Leroy! He looked up from the couch where he'd been scrolling through job listings, or pretending to. What? She walked into the living room holding the statements, hands shaking with something beyond anger. Rage felt too hot, too explosive for what was building in her chest. This was colder, sharper. $15,000. She threw the papers onto the coffee table in front of him, From my retirement account. 3 withdrawals. I never signed for these. Explain. Right now. Leroy's face shifted through expressions too quickly. Surprise, guilt, defensiveness, before settling on righteous justification. We needed it. The bills, the apartment deposit, my legal fees. He stood, talking faster, words tumbling over each other. It's community property. Technically, I didn't need permission. Every married couple shares finances. Your father cut us off. What was I supposed to do? You took this while we lived in his house? Her voice came out flat, stripped of emotion. Rent-free, before any of this happened. You were stealing from me when we had no expenses? What were you really spending it on? It wasn't stealing, Georgiana. It was our money. I made financial decisions for our household. Decisions I didn't know about. Money you hid from me. She picked up the statements, held them against her chest, like evidence that needed protecting. When did you plan to tell me? When the account hit 0? I was going to replace it. Once the sales commissions came through. What commissions? You haven't made a sale in months. You haven't had a job in 6 weeks. You're not replacing anything? The argument spiraled from there, voices rising until neighbors probably heard through the thin walls. Eventually, Leroy stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door. Georgiana stood alone in the living room, still holding the statements, breathing hard. She walked to the bathroom, locked herself in, sat on the closed toilet lid, opened her phone and logged into her retirement account, confirming what the statements showed. 13,000 remained where 28 should be. Then she opened her browser and searched his name with the keyword debt. Found it in the credit monitoring app they'd set up when they got married. Joint account access. She'd never looked at his credit report before. Trusted him. Trusted that adults managed their own finances responsibly. 7 credit cards, all maxed. Total debt, $43,000. She did the math on her phone's calculator. 15,000 stolen plus 43,000. In debt equaled $58,000 in damage. A hole so deep she couldn't see the bottom. And he'd blamed her father for everything. She remembered the phone call 6 weeks ago. Her father's voice, measured and calm, offering help with one condition: file for divorce and come home. He'd known. Somehow her father had known about the retirement withdrawals, about the debt, about all of it. That's why he'd made the offer. Not to punish her, to protect her. She opened a new browser tab with trembling fingers. Typed, Divorce Lawyer, Scottsdale, Arizona. That night she slept on the couch. The next morning, while Leroy still slept, she sent a text to her father. Can we meet? Just cheer us. I need to understand something. His response came within minutes. Name the place. They met at a coffee shop on Camelback Road, neutral territory neither of them frequented. Wilbert arrived first, wearing casual clothes, polo shirt, khaki pants, looking relaxed and patient. She arrived 10 minutes late, having circled the block twice before working up the courage to park. He'd already ordered her a latte, remembered how she took it. The small gesture nearly broke her composure. They sat across from each other at a corner table. Georgiana stirred her coffee repeatedly without drinking, watching the foam swirl and dissipate. Why did you do this? She finally looked up at him. Press charges? Refuse to help us? Make that divorce demand? Her father's expression remained calm, open. No anger, no judgment, just patience. I didn't do this to you, he said quietly. He assaulted me. I documented it and let the legal system function as designed. I won't give money to a man who steals from my daughter and blames everyone but himself for his choices. She stared at her coffee again, processing. You knew about the retirement money. That's why you made that offer. Divorce and come home. You were trying to save me from him. I was trying to help you see clearly. Sometimes people need to discover truth themselves. How did you know? About the money? He met her eyes steadily. Does it matter how? What matters is that it's true. What matters is what you do now. She nodded slowly, still stirring coffee she wouldn't drink. Outside, July heat shimmered off the parking lot asphalt. Inside, air conditioning hummed steadily, keeping everything cool and controlled. If I came home? She spoke carefully, testing the words. What would that look like? Your room is exactly as you left it. The locks are different. He can't follow you there. The protective order, still active, still enforceable. She sat quietly, thinking about the apartment with its thin walls and overdue rent, about Leroy's anger that grew sharper each day, about $15,000 stolen and $43,000 in debt, about a marriage that had cost her everything and given her nothing but stress. "I need to think about this," she finally said. "Take your time." Her father stood, left cash on the table for both coffees. "The offer stands. When you're ready." He walked out first, leaving her alone with her untouched latte, and thoughts she couldn't quite organize into decisions yet. But something had shifted. Some weight had moved from one side of the scale to the other. The question wasn't whether she'd leave anymore. It was when. 10 days after our coffee shop conversation, my phone rang while I sat on the back patio reading. "Dad, I'm coming home. Today? Can I come today?" Georgiana's voice carried something I hadn't heard in months. Certainty. "Of course, whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now." She'd waited until Leroy left for his probation check-in that morning. The moment his car pulled away from the apartment, she'd called her divorce attorney and driven straight to the office in downtown Scottsdale. The attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in difficult separations, had the petition ready. Georgiana read through it once, signed 3 separate pages without hesitation. Irreconcilable differences. Unauthorized use of marital funds. Property division requested. Patricia uploaded the documents to the court's electronic filing system while Georgiana watched. The screen flashed green. "Filing accepted." "You're officially in process," Patricia said. 60 days minimum before the decree is final. Here's a copy for your records and one for him. I'll arrange a police escort for tonight so you can collect the rest of your belongings safely." Georgiana drove back to the apartment with 2 copies of the divorce petition on the passenger seat. Started packing before she could second-guess herself. Clothes folded into suitcases. Laptop secured in its case. Documents collected. Personal photos removed from frames. Her family, her childhood, her mother's smile, leaving only the wedding photo which she placed face down on the dresser. She heard his car pull into the lot around 1. Heard his footsteps on the stairs. Heard the key in the lock. Leroy walked in and froze. 2 suitcases by the door. Her purse packed, her keys in hand. "What are you doing?" She reached into her purse, pulled out the petition, handed it to him. Her hand didn't shake. "I filed for divorce this morning. The papers were served electronically. I'm moving back to my father's house. This marriage is over." He grabbed the papers, read the header, face cycling through colors. Red, then white, then red again. He threw them on the floor. "Over? Because of him. He's been poisoning you against me. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Don't let your father destroy our marriage. Georgiana, please." She bent down, picked up the papers, folded them carefully, returned them to her purse. When she spoke, her voice came out quiet but firm. "You stole $15,000 from my retirement while we lived rent-free. You blamed everyone but yourself. You threw a glass at my father's face. I'm not destroying this marriage. You already did." She picked up her suitcases and walked toward the door. He followed, still talking, voice climbing toward something desperate and ugly, but he didn't touch her. Probation violation hovered in his mind, officers' warnings echoing. One more mistake, and he'd be in jail. She loaded her car without looking back, started the engine while he stood in the parking lot, shouting questions she didn't answer. Then she drove away, watching him shrink in the rearview mirror until he disappeared. My doorbell rang 20 minutes later. I opened the door and saw my daughter standing there with tear tracks on her face and 2 suitcases at her feet. I stepped aside without speaking, held the door wide. "Welcome home." She walked in like she'd been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. I picked up her suitcases and carried them upstairs to the guest room I'd quietly prepared. Fresh linens on the bed, cleared dresser drawers, empty hangers in the closet, towels folded on the chair, small preparations that said "you're welcome here" without needing words. "Take your time settling in," I said from the doorway. "I made dinner. It's in the oven if you're hungry. We don't need to talk about anything tonight." She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. That evening, Patricia's arranged police escort met Georgiana at the apartment complex. 2 officers, a man and woman, both professional and patient, who'd done this before and knew the drill. "Ma'am, take whatever belongs to you. Sir, you need to stay back. This is a legal separation in progress. No interference or we'll have to remove you from the premises." Leroy stood in the bedroom doorway while Georgiana packed boxes with the rest of her clothes, her books, kitchen items she'd bought. The officers maintained position between them, not hostile but absolutely clear about boundaries. She worked quickly, efficiently, checking drawers and closets one final time. Found the photograph of her mother she'd been looking for, wrapped it carefully in a sweater, left the wedding album on the closet shelf. 20 minutes, 4 boxes, and it was done. The officers carried 2 boxes to her car while she carried the others. Leroy watched from the apartment window, face pressed against glass like a child watching something he couldn't have. She thanked the officers, got in her car, and drove away from that cheap apartment with its thin walls and overdue rent for the last time. When she arrived back at my house, the bedroom light was on, door open, waiting. She carried in the final boxes and set them in the corner of her room. Not the guest room anymore. Her room. We stood there in comfortable silence, looking at the space that would be hers again. The walls needed fresh paint. The furniture was dated, but it was safe, and it was home. "We should repaint this room," she said quietly. "Fresh start." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone different from the woman who'd left 8 months ago defending a man who didn't deserve her loyalty. Saw someone stronger, clearer, ready to build something new. "What color?" She smiled. First genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Something bright," she said. "Something that looks like hope." 3 weeks later, on a late August morning that promised another scorching afternoon, I sat on my back patio, with coffee and the newspaper. The guest room upstairs was no longer a guest room. Soft blue walls, new curtains, furniture we'd assembled together, family photos on the walls, Georgiana as a child, her mother and me on our wedding day, graduations and holidays from better times. No wedding photos. Those belonged to a chapter we'd closed. I heard the mail slot clank around 10, walked inside, gathered the stack of envelopes. 2 caught my attention immediately. A large manila envelope from Maricopa County Superior Court, addressed to Georgiana, and a business envelope for me from the county clerk's office. I climbed the stairs to her room, knocked gently. She looked up from her laptop, work paused mid-sentence. The decree arrived. Her face shifted through several expressions before settling on something like relief mixed with resolve. She saved her work, stood, followed me down to the kitchen. We sat at the table together. She slid her finger under the envelope flap, pulled out the multi-page document, and began reading the summary page aloud. "Dissolution of marriage granted, effective immediately. Property divided as stipulated. Petitioner awarded retirement account balance minus previous withdrawals. Respondent retains all personal debt obligations. All marital obligations terminated effective today, August 28th, 2025. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the table, pressing her hand flat against it like she could make it more real through touch. "It's done." I nodded, picked up my envelope, slid it open with a letter opener. Single page, official letterhead. Notification of case closure. State of Arizona versus Leroy Patterson. All terms of plea agreement satisfied. Probation completed. Community service verified. Anger management program certificate received. Victim notification complete. Case file archived. I read it once, then walked to my office and placed the letter in a desk drawer, on top of the police report, the protective order, the PI report. Closed the drawer firmly. The afternoon passed quietly. Georgiana worked upstairs. I read in the living room. We moved through the house like people who'd learned to share space comfortably, neither crowding nor avoiding. Around 6, when the heat had broken slightly, we carried coffee cups to the back patio. I'd bought a second chair after she moved in, matching style to mine, subtle acknowledgement that her presence here was permanent. We sat watching light change across the desert landscape, neither speaking for several minutes. The silence between us felt earned, comfortable. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first." Her voice came out soft but clear. "Sorry I chose him over you for so long. Sorry I had to learn the hard way." I took a sip of coffee, let the words settle before responding. "You believed when you were ready. Nobody can be convinced of truth they're not prepared to see. You got there. That's what matters. We're here now." She nodded, staring at the horizon where mountains met darkening sky. Is it wrong that I feel relieved? Not angry, not vindictive, just free? That's exactly right. Freedom is the point. The rest was just removing obstacles to get here. Another stretch of silence. A bird called somewhere in the mesquite tree. Car passed on the distant street. She reached over, patted my hand briefly. Simple gesture of gratitude and connection. I nodded acknowledgement. We stayed there as the sky darkened through shades of orange and purple into deep blue. Stars began appearing one by one, first bright and certain, then more and smaller until the sky filled with light. I thought about the past 6 months, the glass shattering against my temple, the blood on my collar, the choice I'd made to document everything, to press charges, to let the legal system function exactly as designed. I hadn't destroyed Leroy. I'd simply refused to enable him, refused to fund his failures, refused to pretend assault was acceptable because it happened within a family. The consequences that followed, arrest, conviction, job loss, divorce, those came from his own actions, not my revenge. Georgiana was healing, therapy twice a week, working steadily, sleeping through the night again. Some mornings I heard her humming while making coffee, and the sound filled the house with something that had been missing. The protective order was still technically active, though Leroy had left Arizona 3 days after the divorce filing. His brother in Nevada had taken him in, starting over at 37 with nothing but debt and a criminal record. I didn't wish him harm. I simply didn't think about him at all. My house was quiet again, peaceful, mine. But this time with my daughter here, safe, building her own future instead of financing someone else's failures. The stars overhead multiplied in the darkness. Desert night air cooled against my skin. "We should go in," Georgiana said eventually. "Early morning tomorrow." I stood, offered my hand to help her up. She took it, rose, and we gathered our cups. Inside, she headed upstairs to her blue room with its hopeful walls. I heard her door close softly, her footsteps moving around as she prepared for bed. I turned off the patio light and locked the door. Inside, the house was quiet. Everything was exactly as it should be. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.